Good evening, everyone. Find a seat. We're going to get started. Welcome to the Jewish Museum. My name is Jenna Weiss. I'm the manager of public programs here, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's lecture with Esther de Costa Meyer, who's the curator of the exhibition Pierre Chareau, Modern Architecture and Design. The Salo W. Barone program has been endowed by the trustees of the Salo W. and Jeanette M. Barone Foundation. We are so pleased that Foundation trustees Charles Knapp and Betsy Jetel are able to join us for this event. Thank you again for your generous support of the museum's public programming. Tonight's lecture is the final program that's being held in conjunction with this wonderful exhibition on view in our first floor galleries through March 26th. So if you did not have a chance to see it yet, you still have a few more weeks to come back and do so. For full details about all of our upcoming public programs, please visit our website to sign up for our e-news. Now to introduce our speaker for this evening. Professor Esther de Costa Meyer specializes in issues of cultural translation involving architecture, focusing on buildings erected by colonial powers in the global south, and has published on architects Lily Reich and Lena Bobardi. Her previous curatorial work includes the 2003 exhibition Schoenberg, Kandinsky, and the Blue Rider, co-curated with Fred Wasserman here at the Jewish Museum, and the exhibition Frank Gehry online at the Princeton University Art Museum. De Costa Meyer is a professor in the Department of Art and Archaeology at Princeton University. Now please take a moment to silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Esther de Costa Meyer.
Is this on? No. It's on now. Thank you all for coming. It's a great privilege to be here and talk to you about Pierre Chareau. And I also want to begin by thanking my friends at the Jewish Museum. I am an outside curator, so I can't do anything, not a step without my friends here. I see several guardian angels here. Jenna was here talking, one of them, Claudia Nasson, who was my right hand. The other right hand, I had two right hands, Dan Palmer, who's in the room, and I had a third one, Fred Wasserman, who was my previous exhibition. So thank you all. Elise Buxbaum is also here. So thank you all for helping me put this exhibition together. So I'll begin I'll begin by looking for my notes, which I left downstairs. Thank you. And seamlessly, sort of, asking who was Pierre Chareau? Why are we having this exhibition here? So Pierre Chareau was one of the major French designers of the 1920s and early 1930s. He was so well known in his time that other famous designers asked to have pieces designed by him, great designers. Can you please design a desk for me, a table, a sofa, etc. So he was in many ways a designer's designer. And despite this fact, he is largely invisible today as far as the public is concerned for many reasons. One reason is that his work fetches such high prices in the art market that places him beyond the reach of most museums. So it's largely in private hands. The Pompidou has a large collection, but it is not on display. So I would say that outside of France, where you can see probably 14 or 15 pieces of him in Paris. Outside of France, you can only see about a dozen or so pieces in different countries. And in the US, only, to my knowledge, a single chair is on display in Richmond, Virginia, a great collection. They had two, and Cooper Hewitt has many, many pieces on photograph or other objects, but of only one stool, but that's not on display either. So he's been an invisible man, and that invisibility extends also to art exhibitions. There have been to date 2 exhibitions of his work, one at the Pompidou 23 years ago, and another in 2014 in Tokyo. So it made sense, urgent sense, to show him at the Jewish Museum, given the fact that Shahu lived the last 10 years of his life in New York. But part of that invisibility also came from the fact that Shahu's mother and wife were Jewish. Most of his clients were Jewish, and as you will see, much of his oeuvre was scattered when the Germans invaded France. So let's talk a little bit of where Shahu is coming from. He was not he was never trained as a craftsman. He was trained as a draftsman. And he wanted, actually, his great passion was to be an architect. He wanted to study in the School of Architecture, but he couldn't do so. He failed the entrance exam twice, and that did it for the École des Beaux-Arts in France. But the decorative arts became a port of entry for designers, because they would begin by doing furniture, then they would do interior designs, and they would eventually do architecture. That's exactly what happened to Shahu and many of his friends. Now, he was coming out of this great tradition of furniture design in France. I'm hearing some funny noises. Is this kosher? I mean, I'm doing something wrong here? No? Okay. So the decorative arts, the golden age of the decorative arts in France came twice. Once in the 18th century, and once in the 1920s. And I'm showing you one of the more traditionalist, but a very great designer, Émile Jacques Roullman, and you can see the kinship with the age of all the great Louises, Louis the 14th, end of the Louis XIV, and all the way to the unfortunate Louis the 16th. Wood that is not solid wood, but veneered in exotic woods. Roullman, you have the beautiful marquetry, beautiful woods, but the marquetry, which shows labor-intensive work in Risenay, and here Roullman pushes the envelope further. This is ivory inlay. So very luxurious woods. So Shahu is coming out of that tradition, but much more simplified. He wants to be a modern, no tchotchkes, no little decorations, streamlined lines, very elegant lines, but again, veneered in rare woods, silvered brass feet. There is a reference here to the 18th century in the fact that the chauffeuse of the very name of the fireside chairs is an 18th century piece of furniture, and they are upholstered with tapestry designed by a well-known artist who is a friend of his, Jean Lursat. So he's coming out of that tradition, but he's modern, and he wants to be modern, unlike Roullman, who was a colleague of his. So he trained to become a draftsman of furniture in an English firm, Waring and Gillow, and then begins to rise through the ranks. And just before the war, World War I, he's master draftsman. In the war, he's conscripted, spent several years in the artillery, and at his release in 1919, he sets up on his own, and he becomes well known almost immediately. So here you see some of his early designs, still veneered in exotic woods. This is so-called tulip designs. All the works have that flaring profile of the tulip, as you can see there. And Shahu did several, how do you say, in French you call them editions of his work. That is, a client would say, oh, I would like a bed like Madame Lévy or like Madame Bernheim. And so he would do 5, 6, 10, 20 of such beds, slightly different woods, different sizes to fit the apartments of his clients. But early on, he affirms himself with what became his trademark. And there were, I would say, 3 major things. I'm just simplifying, but 3 major things. One was the fact that he is dealing with these gorgeous woods, refined woods that you see here, but he brings wrought iron into the design. Now, the 1920s, late 20s, the Bauhaus was already using tubular steel, bringing furniture to the house. But in France, this was not done. And above all, it's not done when you're using this kind of wood, the refined woods like that. So you can see these 2 pieces are held, these 2 parts of the piece of furniture are held in tension, as it were. They don't resolve themselves into a synthesis. And I should add that this, the wrought iron was made by an ironsmith, a genius, a virtuoso ironsmith who worked in traditional ways at the forge with a hammer. And if you look at this piece closely, it's downstairs, you will see, yes, you will see the nuts and bolts, as you can see there, but you will also see the hammer, the traces of the hammer, the gestures of the human hand. So there's something gestural about it. It's all handmade. So the 2 parts are, in fact, handmade. And on top of it all, it has patina on top, like bronze sculpture. So it's treated like a work of art. Another characteristic of Shahu is not just the combination of rare woods and wrought iron, but the fact, much noticed at the time, that his furniture moved. The pieces swiveled out, and so this whole mirror moved back and forth. It swivels around. want to put your makeup, you can take this out, put it back, close it for more compactness. Or then this desk, which is also downstairs from the Vitra Museum in Germany. And here you see another aspect of Shahu's art, the enormous impact of contemporary art. In this desk, he has done away with mass. Everything you see there, planes slicing through space, either vertically or horizontally, and look at the way the foot falls. I mean, it's just extraordinary. This is the impact of de Stijl, the Dutch avant-garde movement, which was exhibited in France in 1923 at the gallery of Léonce Rosenberg, whom Chareau knew very well indeed. So he is very much influenced by that, and these, oh my goodness, sorry about this piece. These two pieces are downstairs, again showing this moving furniture and the elegance with which, the flexibility, the love of modernity and modern life, with which the pieces swivel out almost like a prosthetic limb. This was characteristic of Shahu. But when you see some of the pieces, and this one is also downstairs, look at this little library with this moving table. Beautiful little bookshelf, not very big, cantilevered like a piece of architecture almost. And then this table with this enormous ball foot, also by Louis d'Albet. And of course, you know that to make this table swivel around, you didn't need this enormous contraption there. It exceeds function, but it does appear like a piece of abstract sculpture that stands on its own. And again, it shows how closely he's looking at abstract art, and it makes his furniture more and more abstract. But at the same time, there is also, especially in the earlier work, I must say, not so much in the late work, there is a lingering anthropomorphism in his work. And some of his most famous lamps are actually the most famous of all his lamps, were called La Religieuse, the nun. And remember the nuns of our childhood that had those funny cornettes with those white, funny, they were slightly magical and terrifying, you know, they were magical creatures. And so these two, they're both downstairs, and you see the difference of treatment of both of them. Look at the neck. That one is very, very thin because it's made of wrought iron. It's made of folded metal. And this one actually is hammered brass, I'm sorry, but so it's hollow. It's just a sheet metal that's been folded. This one is solid rosewood, and it demands a thicker neck below. But it shows him working very closely with this ironsmith who would tell him what he could and couldn't do. So the ironsmith pushed him further and further. You can do this, you can't do that. But Chareau also drew out of him. He was a traditionalist, but drew out of him all these extraordinary modern pieces. La Religieuse became very famous, and so he has the floor lamp, the second middling size, which we don't have below, and the table lamp, the table, how can I say, the dwarf nun that you see here on this wonderful table. And again, this fan table, a trundle table that opens up with movement and can close itself and become a compact triangle, if you wish, in these wonderful things. Now, the lamps which he designed are very interesting. So he was famous for the furniture, but also for these lamps, all made out of alabaster and wrought iron. This is his most well-known model. They're actually very small. We have two in the exhibition. And he used them always in an asymmetrical way. And I actually bought one on eBay. They have these reproductions. And someone clearly was regifting them because I bought it for very little money, and even the reproductions cost very much. I wanted to see how it worked. And you can't read with these lamps. 25 watts, it's nothing. So what it is these are ornaments. These are wall ornaments. The alabaster filters out most of the light, and you have this soft glow, like an accent on the wall. And so he scattered them about, like naturalized them against the wall. And in this hotel, which he did for one of his best patrons, Paul Bernheim, he used 424 all over the hotel. So this is interesting. At a time when the Germans are mass-producing furniture, putting them on the market in great numbers for the rising middle classes, Chareau and his peers fought tooth and nail until the Depression against reproducibility. Reproducibility was fine as long as it was made by hand, and it became a product of handcraft, part of the luxury goods that were associated to Paris, and so that was okay. But reproducibility, I mean mass production, no, it was always by hand. So this was the case until the Depression. But I should say that Shahu and many of his clients were they didn't just love avant-garde art, but they were progressive men and women who really believed in a more egalitarian society. So he was a man of deep contradictions, always straddling several divides. And on one hand, he wanted a more egalitarian society. On the other hand, he wanted to continue doing luxury goods by hand and labor-intensive, that took a lot of labor, and he was a perfectionist. He worked his workmen until everything was exactly as he wanted them. And so all this is going to come to an end with the Depression 1929. All his peers, all of them, that profession is going to go on a downward trend. It didn't happen immediately in France, but within a few years, by 1932, they were all struggling. Now, I don't want to give the impression that the Depression arrived and all of a sudden they all changed their designs. The Depression showed up very clearly the contradiction between his beliefs and his practices. And if we see the work he's doing in 27, 28, 29, before the Depression, it's already going towards greater simplification. This table, which is exhibited downstairs for the first time, it was never exhibited in public before, is made of painted, lacquered wood. And if you're going to paint and lacquer your wood, you don't need rare woods. You don't need Macassar ebony. You don't need rosewood. It can be any kind of walnut, ash, sycamore, oak. And so it shows already a greater simplification and the willingness, at least, to make a kind of furniture that was simpler, more streamlined, and was not as labor-intensive as the rare veneers that he was using in his other work. Also, going towards reproducibility, but never going there, is the metal work, the metal furniture he did for many of his patrons. These were for more recreational purposes, sometimes used in the garden, sometimes used in offices. That is, they would not be placed in the living room in any of his patrons' homes, but they, at least in principle, they were reproducible. So this chair folds up and it becomes a thin rectangle. This part espouses the rectangle that you see there. So again, the idea of movement, the idea of flexibility, but all of this done by his great, wonderful ironsmith, Louis d'Albet. So these are luxury pieces, all of them. They were not yet made for mass production. The propeller table, much used, as you can see here, the same way. These are all done by hand, even though they seem to allude to a mass production. They are not mass produced. Now, so Shahu was known not so much, I wouldn't say not so much, Shahu was known not only for his furniture, but also for his interior. So for his best patrons, he would do, or I would say for his wealthiest patrons, he would do entire interiors. The living room, the music room, the office, the master bedroom, the nursery, and so on. And his interiors were famous. All the decorative artists, the group to which he belonged, they would exhibit them 2 or 3 times a year in the great Salon of the Decorative Arts in the spring, the Salon d'automne in autumn, where they and the artists would come together and exhibit all their work in one great salon. And he was famous not just for the harmonious way he worked his interiors, but for the ceilings. Shahu was doing interiors for his clients in the kind of apartment house that you could still see in Paris today. A series of little boxy rooms, very boxy, with very tall ceilings. And so he would intervene. He would lower the ceilings to create a harmonious, volumetric ensemble where the spaces between the furniture and between the furniture, the walls, and the ceiling were carefully thought out. And one of his trademarks before the Depression were these sculptural ceilings. He would intervene in the ceiling, so the ceiling was not something you never pay attention to. In Shahu's work, they were not background. He made them, he forced them into your consciousness. They were part of the foreground. And so in this case, for example, this column was not necessary. He had clearly knocked down the retaining walls, as he often did. This was actually in a new apartment, a new house, a residence designed by his colleague Mallet Stevens, but he added layers, different layers, to create these asymmetrical ceilings with rows of alabaster lamps that you see there, which lit up the interior. But I suspect, if you can see right at the top of the ceiling, right in the middle, I suspect that what really lit up that room were the two electric lights that you see there, that were not hidden behind these beautiful screens of alabaster. Now, Shahu, so as I was saying, Shahu was working for these wonderful patrons, creating these interiors. And here you see what he would do. So he inherited a series, in this case, 3 rooms. He knocked, and this is a beautiful pochoir prints. We have many downstairs in the exhibition. These were prints which were not done by Shahu. He would give a gouache to specialists who would then make stencils of each color one by one to create these highly sought after prints, which were collector's items at the time. You can see very clearly here that he cut these 3 rooms. He destroyed the walls and to create a more fluid environment where space could flow. You could see the difference where he separated the living room, so he cut part of this wall down, part of this wall down to create more spaciousness. And he's here seeking that perfect harmonious integration between furniture and architecture, but also between furniture, architecture, and the works of art of the patrons. So many of his interiors, he's going to try and create a language that will do justice, not just to the furniture and the architecture, but to the kind of art the patron had on the walls. In this case, modern art. In other cases, Chinese art or African art. This is was one of his most beautiful interiors, the Salon of Elena Bernheim. None of his interiors survive. You know what happens when the original owners die, they bequeath the furniture to their children, they divide it. The children die, they subdivide it. The grandchildren, the great-grandchildren inherit a chair here or a table there, and they see the prices on Christie's or Sotheby's, they sell, right? So the interiors have all gone. There's the single one left, but this is one of the most beautiful one for the Elena Bernheim, one of his greatest patrons, again, the Bernheim family. And you see, he did a totally different design from the one you just saw, where the patron had modern art on the walls. Here, she had these Chinese lacquered panels called coromandel, and he did these wonderful interiors with bamboo. You know, you don't see this in Paris. And so, very exquisite. The furniture, also a throwback to the 18th century. So what is interesting about these salons that he did is the salons were places from the 18th century onwards that had that were ambitious endeavors that staged the family's social life. A holdover from the 18th century where salons were places to eat, to meet, to exchange ideas, very courtly, very elegant way. The same thing happens here. There are pianos and other parts of this apartment that you can't see here. But the interiors of Shahu for these clients had a more subtle function. They spoke to the guests on behalf of the owners. They spoke of the elegance of the owner, of their taste, of their wealth, but very discreetly, I should say. And to us who are coming 70, 80 years later, they also spoke of colonialism. All the decorative arts of this time of the 20s are predicated on colonialism, the extractive industries. So it's not just the leopard skin, but something that I overlooked when I went to see this piece in Germany. In Cologne, it was bought by a dealer directly from Elena Bernheim, so the provenance was important for me. It came directly from the family. They bought it in the 70s. But I overlooked this little detail, ivory feet. And so, although the Museum of Decorative Arts in Cologne wanted to lend the exhibition, signed the contract, we could not borrow it because ivory cannot enter the country. So there is this thing. Many of the woods that we see here are endangered species. It's not just ivory, and they're difficult. And you see immediately what happened after the Depression, after the apartments changed, right? The sculptured ceilings disappear. Clients are still coming, but they are more down to earth. And so you can see the divisions of the rooms. Yes, he knocks the walls down, but he can't make the, he has to be simplified, his vocabulary. That was the taste then towards greater simplification. So he divides the partitions with glass and with folded screens and curtains. As you can see, the two photographs show the same suite of 3 rooms seen from different ends, living room all the way to the sitting room on the other side. So a very interesting change that happens to him after 1929. Now, Chareau's works were widely published in the shelter magazines and in the lavish magazines of the decorative artists at the time, but they also found a wide diffusion in film, in silent film. Above all, for this avant-garde film director, Marcel Duchamp. Duchamp liked films. Duchamp was a dandy, an aesthete. So his whole apartment was done partly by Chareau, partly by a good friend of Chareau, Michel Dufay, another decorative artist. But all his films, everything, every piece of hardware that was visible in his film was given over to the best designers. If it was glass, it was Lalique. If it was silverware, it was Bizet. Clothing, Poiret, and so on. And furniture would be Shahu, and you recognize La Religieuse, the floor lamp, many of the pieces, and all this extraordinarily elegant furniture. And some of these, his works were very, very interesting. This is another film by Marcel Duchamp, L'Argent. This photograph was in MoMA without a label. And in fact, L'Argent was based on a very steamy novel of greed by Émile Zola. And the actress is someone I'm sure all of you know. Remember Fritz Lang's Metropolis? Fritz Lang? Yes? Brigitte Helm, the great actress. That is her sitting on Chareau's sofa right there. But what is interesting here, as you realize that his interiors, whether it's for film or for his patrons, required carpets, throws, tapestries, wall hangings. He didn't want to design them himself. And so what he did was he founded a second showroom. He had a showroom in his home. You will see it in a minute. But he opened a room, a sales room, a showroom where he actually sold carpets, wallpaper, objets, throws, and those cushions, those kinds of things, but designed by his peers and by his wife. So he commissioned, so this is La Boutique Pierre Chareau. On the left bank, it looks very homespun here because of the lovely lady selling flowers and the little kitty, but in fact it was a very lavish, elegant affair. And in this, he sold things like exquisite wallpaper designed by famous artists. This was Jean Lursa, who also did carpets and tapestries for him. He was a well-known artist at the time. And all of this produced under the label La Boutique Pierre Chareau. Now, Chareau was not only selling wallpaper, tapestries, woven textiles in his boutique, he also showed works of art. It was also an art gallery. Jean Boucher, whose name you can see there, was a dealer who later became very well known in later years. She sold to the Guggenheim, to MoMA, and to several French museums as well. But here she is beginning, and she was a very close friend of the Chareaus, so she asked if she could begin showing her work, her artists, in the boutique by Pierre Chareau. So here you see, 1925, she's showing a series of artists, et cetera, after June the 5th, Picasso and Chagall. Right there. It was a win-win situation. She got to show the beautiful arts in these exquisite surroundings with wallpaper, carpets, sofas, furniture by Chareau, and he got to have his beloved art, modern art, on the sides. And here's Jean Boucher again, showing Lipsitz, great friend of Picasso, Lipsitz and his wife, the poet, Lithuanian poet, they were both Lithuanian, Berthe Lipsitz, and Picasso dans la boutique Pierre Chareau. So he was well known as a man who loved the avant-garde of his time and who exhibited as well. And Chareau and his wife Dolly, whom I'll introduce to you in a moment, were avid collectors of art, even though they were not wealthy. But the kind of art they collected, you can see here, the quality of his work. So Mondrian, lived in France for some time. Then World War I broke out. He returns to Holland, and then, as you know, he came to live in New York. And in his lifetime, he sold 2 paintings in France, one of them to Pierre Chareau. And this was his insurance when he came in exile to the United States. He sold them later to survive. And this piece was sold to the Baltimore Art Museum, part of the Sadie Mae bequest. And this Modigliani, he lent to MoMA before the war, and then had to prove that he was actually the Shahu who owned the Modigliani. This is one of the 20-some sculptures that Modigliani did. Modigliani, as you know, was mainly painting, but so this is a rare piece of work now owned by MoMA. So he sold these to major museums. That gives you an idea of the quality of art that Shahu collected, though, as I say, he was not a wealthy man. He actually had to do some kind of sacrifice, too. He had a lavish lifestyle. Now, I wouldn't say lavish. He had an elegant lifestyle, shall I say. And he was also very much photographed. The home which he shared with his wife had his own salon. He had concerts, he had art showings in his home, not just in La Boutique Pierre Chareau. This was the home which also served on the right bank, which also served as one of his showrooms, shown here in a beautiful photograph by the Jewish-Hungarian photographer André Kertész, and this one by the American photographer Thérèse Bonnet. That was at MoMA, this was at the Cooper Hewitt. And on the wall, so they both show you the same corner of the living room. But what is interesting, look at the works behind here. And here I have to give a tribute to Dan Palmer, a detective extraordinaire. Dan, where are you? Who was at the Jewish Museum and who helped and did tremendous work scouting out, trying to identify, using all sorts of technological device to identify these paintings. You can see how he changed his work. Here you have 3 magnificent collages by Picasso, very different from the Picasso and the Braque that you see behind the piano, and 3 sculptures by Lipsitz, copies or similar ones of which are downstairs. There were several editions of these, so we don't know exactly which one was owned by Shahu. So Shahu was a man who loved to surround himself with art, and he used art to brand his interiors. The first time he showed something in the United States, he didn't come here, but his art did, was in 1928 at a great exhibition that took place in Lord and Taylor's. 1928. This was the years when Macy's and Lord and Taylor were vying with one another to present the French decorative arts. And the show was organized by extraordinary woman Dorothy Shaver, who later became the first American woman to head a department store, Lord and Taylor's. The exhibition was designed by the architect Jacques Hélicon, a French architect, and you can see a corner of Chareau's alcove, and you can see the Léger and beautiful watercolors by Léger, the Lipsitz, which you recognize over there. He didn't own any of these works. He borrowed them from Léger, who was a friend of his. So he had this fascination with art. He knew many artists, and as I said, he branded his interior. It was a way of saying that the decorative arts and the fine arts are on the same level. So it was very interesting. Shahu was also part of a group of friends who put money every month. They gave the same amount in a kitty, and they drew lots to see who would buy, and they would buy art, contemporary art, and they drew lots to find out who would exhibit the Matisse, who would exhibit the Picasso, and so on. So we know that what he had at home. We have the catalog downstairs, but none of the paintings that we now know to be by him were in that catalog. So we've identified a part of his collection, that of his and his wife's collection. Now, up to now, Chareau's work has been seen as someone who is developed between World War I and World War II. And those parameters are crucial to understand Shahu. World War I put a buffer between his training in the decorative arts and his ability to say, okay, after 4 years in the army, he became a free man. He knew he was his own man. He could set up shop on his own. He gained confidence. So that was important. World War II, he lost everything. He lost his home, he lost his clients, he lost all his belongings, except for the works of art they could get out of the country, but they had to sell them all. So he lost virtually everything and died in exile. But I think, those two parameters are important. But to understand how Chareau developed as a human being culturally, his beliefs, his ideals, we have to use two other parameters as well. It's not an either-or situation, but we have to spread a wider net. And those two other parameters are the end of the Dreyfus affair in 1906, when Chareau was 23 years old, he was not a child, and 1936, when Léon Blum accedes to power at the head of the Front Populaire in France and becomes France's first Jewish prime minister. And that arc of time witnesses in France the rise of a Franco-Jewish intelligence as had not been seen before. I don't want to give the impression that they weren't visible before. The Franco-Jewish intellectuals had been present in the academy, in politics, in the ministry since Napoleon III, certainly the court of Napoleon III. But this arc of time was different. You see the rise of the middle classes and writers, politicians, composers, conductors. It's a very large number indeed that appear. Chareau was part of this group. He didn't know Léon Blum personally. I found no record of that. But two of Léon Blum's close associates, very close associates, were clients of Chareau. The first one is Georges Boris, who is this man here. Georges Boris was a close confidant and a great political figure, also Jewish. And he was very, very close to Léon Blum and remains in politics for many, many years. He was a highly cultivated man, as was Léon Blum himself. Georges Boris edited a magazine, defended Picasso, Le Corbusier, musicians, cinema. He was a man after Chareau's own heart, and Chareau was a man after his own heart. And you see here the apartment, elegant apartment that Chareau designed for Georges Boris. Incidentally, you see him talking to the youngest man in this photograph. Anyone? Pierre Mendès France, who would later, after the war, become France's second Jewish prime minister. So he was already in the circle of Léon Blum, and he was not a client of Chareau. And the other person close to Chareau who was a client of, the other client of Chareau who was close to Léon Blum was the minister Alexandre Israël, who was Minister of Public Health. I didn't find his interior, but I did find the sofa. As you can see, for Sotheby's catalog, Collection Alexandre Israël, Ministre des Colonies. In the gouvernement of Léon Blum, I got my French-English mixed up, anyway, minister, he was actually not Minister of Colonies, he was Minister of Health. And so, again, two people close to this great man, to Léon Blum, and they were both clients of Chareau. So what I want to say is that Chareau was part of these progressive forces. He knew that he was part of it. He fought to defend the Spanish Republic, that is, signed manifestos to defend the Spanish Republic when it was being attacked. He sent help to the people starving in Russia. There was certain pride in the fact that he was part of this cohort of great thinkers. And doers. And I should say he was not alone. In the decorative arts themselves, there was a very high number of Jewish designers who were extremely successful. Some of them you know very well. Jean-Michel Franck, still very prized today, and also highly priced today. Jacques Adnet. Jacques Adnet was very close to, or was a close friend of Chareau's. You could see both very elegant designers, more contemplative. This is not a value judgment. They're both extremely elegant. Chareau was always more restless. He was older, but there's always a restlessness. You know, the things are moving around, and the wrought iron is not shiny and smooth as it not Adnet. So he was one of these many designers. There were so many of them for the same reason Chareau became a designer. They entered architecture that way, some of them, just inching their way through the decorative arts, but there was a very high number. There was also a very large number of great dealers, of great critics who were Jewish, many of them very famous, and they were all helping create a climate where these artists and these decorative artists could flourish. Valdemar Georges, Gustave Kahn, André Levinson, Claude Roger Marx, and the Rosenthal spouses, Gabrielle and Léon. They didn't always write about decorative arts, so all these, there are about dozens of Jewish decorative artists, they made it on their own regardless of the critics, but the critics were always there, also there to lend a hand. And I should also mention the great art dealers. There are a great many of them. So you see the Galerie Seligman, the Galerie Bernheim Jeune. This is not the same Bernheim family that Shahu worked for. It was another, a different branch, no relation. The Galerie Rosenberg, Kahnweiler, the great dealer of the Cubists. So what I'm saying is that there was an infrastructure, an intellectual infrastructure. These people were not all members of the same coterie. They didn't all know each other. But Chareau was part of this progressive wing. Now, these dealers dealt with modern art. They never exhibited the decorative arts. Why were they important to Chareau? Because he was their client. He bought art for them. It is believed that he bought the Picassos from Kahnweiler, and he may have bought the Mondrian from Léonce Rosenberg, who knew him very well because Rosenberg published some of Chareau's work in 1923. So there is that aspect, too, that dealers, critics, others, there was this large group of people who were important, and the same holds true for music. Music was extremely important for Chareau. He and his wife were both studied music. She came from a very wealthy family, studied piano, was very proud of her lineage, came from a music-loving family. So did Chareau. His sister, Jeanne, younger sister, was a pianist. His uncle was a music critic. And Chareau actually, in his first year of his marriage, had a great gathering in his home and did a piano reduction of Debussy's The Blessed Damozel. So he was a gifted amateur, no more than that, but still. And he knew many of the people. Paul Dukas, the elder of the oldest of the Jewish composers who were living in France at the time, no connection to Chareau. But his student, Darius Milhaud, was a close friend of Chareau, frequented Chareau. They both worked on one of the silent films I showed you together. He did the score, now lost, for the L'Inhumaine, the films by Marcel Duchamp, for which Chareau did the furniture. So a close friend of Chareau and a close friend of the Bernheim family, the big patrons of Chareau. So he played in their houses, both of them. Another famous figure, Pierre Monteux, both of them from two Sephardic families in the south of France. Monteux's wife was a very close friend of Chareau, and later, when they were all in exile in New York, Chareau did a house for his first wife, the pianist Germaine Monteux. So Chareau was someone for whom music and art were not watertight compartments. The notion of harmony and dissonance, of rhythm, of duration appears in his furniture as well as in the work of these composers and conductors. And these are just a few of the people that he knew in music. But at least these are the ones I could identify that he knew them very well. Now, perhaps the most important thing about this Franco-Jewish intelligentsia that is rising, that's flourishing between the wars, or not between the wars, between the end of the Dreyfus Affair and the rise of the Front Populaire in 1936 and Léon Blum, was the fact that he was deeply influenced and indebted to his patrons. And this was due to a large extent to his wife, Dolly Shahu. Dolly was the glue that held his professional and private life together. Shahu was moody, shy, introverted. Dolly was gregarious, funny, warm, an extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary woman in every possible way. She came from a rather wealthy family, a line of distinguished physicians, but her father lost all his money in bad investments, and so she went to Paris and started teaching English. And everybody who met Dolly was indebted to her. I mean, she made friends easily. She was a large, imposing lady. And their neighbor, they had a summer house just outside Paris in Louveciennes. And their neighbor was the writer Anaïs Nin. And Nin writes in her diary, the 3 volumes, she writes, I heard Madame Chareau's voice coming over the hedge, a stentorian voice telling the gardener what to do. And I always shied away from her because I thought she was authoritarian. And she said, what was my surprise when my book on D.H. Lawrence came out and my first fan letter came from Dolly Shahu. And Anaïs Nin, who wasn't one to love women, became very enthusiastic about Dolly, and I'll come back to that in a minute. It was also Dolly who allowed us to prove that Shahu's mother was Jewish. In a series of letters that she wrote to a cousin, Harold Rubinstein, who was a playwright and a solicitor in London, he writes to her. Her real name was Louise Dyte, D-Y-T-E, and he writes to her and asks her if Dolly Shahu was Louise Dyte. He was doing the genealogical tree of his family. And Dolly answered, yes. And she talks about her father, David Hyman Dyte. I am his only child, married to Pierre Chareau, architect, no children, Catholic, but with much Sephardim Jewish blood. So we could prove that his mother was Jewish. Now, most of his patrons were Jewish, and their importance can hardly be overstated. They were the ones who were, especially the Bernheims, and the Levies, the Teplansky, they were all interrelated. They saw themselves as the self-appointed custodians of his work. He survived, his work survives because they squirreled it away, many of them. During the war, they kept it, they published the work, many of them. Those who could hide it, others lost it, as you will see. But their loyalty to the Shahu was extraordinary. And it was probably because of Dolly, because she taught English early on to 2 cousins, the daughters of the 2 Bernheim brothers, who were these real estate tycoons. His first patron was Edmond Flegg, who later, some of you may know, became one of the most famous writers of Jewish issues in France, and who in 1928 wrote Pourquoi je suis juif, Why I am a Jew. He first became he designed this in 1908 before he had his own firm as a friend, because his Flegg's wife, Madeleine Bernheim, had been a student of Dolly's. And look at the date. This is interesting. This is 2 years after the Dreyfus Affair. And Edmond Flegg, who was not French, but Swiss, from Geneva, his whole life, he became, the Dreyfus Affair transformed him into the man he later became, and he changed his life around and became dedicated to Jewish issues because of that. So Madeleine Bernheim commissions this house, and Flegg became a lifelong patron and friend of Shahu, wrote on Shahu, asked him to do one of his plays for him. And Madeleine Bernheim's cousin, Annie Bernheim, commissions the most important thing Shahu ever did, which was the famous glass house, La Maison de Verre, which he designed in collaboration with the Dutch architect Bernard Bijvoet, who worked for him in his office, and the wonderful ironsmith, Louis Dalbé. So just to wrap up the talk, this house was a tour de force. It was given to Annie Bernheim by her father, the real estate, one of the 2 real estate tycoon brothers. He gave them as a wedding present this undistinguished 18th century apartment in a very fashionable part of Paris with a magnificent private garden in the back. And he gave it as a tear down. You're going to tear it down, build your own residence. Well, they couldn't tear it down because there's an elderly lady who lived on the top floor and owned the attic, and she actually rented the apartment, and the law protected him as it should. So they took this idea that they were going to shore up the old lady with a steel frame and left this lady levitating there for 4 years. And as you can see, tall party walls on either side. This dictated the solution which they ultimately adopted, which was to create a glass facade. So where there had been 2 stories that you entered directly, no steps, you enter directly to the ground floor, and then there are 2 floors above. You'll see it in a minute. And the side wing, which is shallow, is for services. Dr. d'Alsace, who married Annie Bernheim, was a gynecologist But he was a brilliant man. He was a lawyer who then studied law, then studied medicine, and became, I would say, exaggerating a little bit, I can't find an equivalent, a kind of the French father of Planned Parenthood, something like that. And so this was a house of intellectuals, a house of music. Elena Bernheim was a pianist herself, a gifted one. So this was a house that received many members of the avant-garde, Matisse, Léger, Breton, Sarah. And the house was clad with gorgeous, originally, with these beautiful Nevada brick or glass brick done by the Saint-Gobain family. So it's translucent, not transparent, so the privacy of the house is maintained. As you enter, you go up the steps and you enter this grand salon that you see there, and the first thing you see are the I-beams. The I-beams, I mean, all industry is revealed here. Not only does he do the two architects leave the I-beams exposed, but they paint them red to call attention to the industry. The floor, as you see, rubber tiles straight off the industrial shelf. It's rolled out from the industry. So it is a strange combination of a curtain wall, everything done industrially, everything exposed, all the conduits, heat, telephone wires, everything is exposed. Nothing is hidden away. And at the same time, the bespoke furniture, elegant furniture, all done by hand, all done in exotic woods. And the ironsmith, Louis d'Albet, made all these ingenious devices, like this. This is the sitting room of Madame d'Alsace, much changed. I mean, it was much more beautiful before when she lived here with much more elegant furniture. This is a ship's ladder, which is retractable. Notice there are no balustrades. This comes to about this high, so you have to kind of crawl up with your heart in your mouth, and it closes up. So you can retract it. Is it practical? No, it's not practical. It has these louvers here to bring air, and you wind this up like a submarine of Jules Verne, you know, one of these old 19th century things that opens. So the house is full of these incredible devices, which look industrial. They look very modern. They're all handmade by Louis d'Albet. It's all luxury. It's a millionaire's house. So this is an extraordinary house. But then it finished in 1932 when his career, like all that, like the careers of his peers, all was beginning to go on a decline. He manages to, he sells some of his works, part of his land, etc., and finally things come to a head in 1940 when the Germans march down the Champs-Élysées. And so knowing that most of his patrons were Jews, we have to ask ourselves about the provenance of, first of all, what happened to these families, and second, what happened to the furniture. Shahu was surrounded by a lot of violence. He left within a few weeks of the Germans arriving. He went to Morocco waiting for a visa, finally comes to America through Casablanca. The brave Dolly stays behind for 2 more years. We have the papers of their arrival on Ellis Island. Anaïs Nin sees Dolly in 1941 at a party and is almost faints. She said, let me quote, see if I can find the quotation here. She says, Anaïs Nin, anyway, she says, I think of the Pierre Chareaus in danger because they are Jews. And then she meets Dolly, and she says, she was a very brave woman who sent Pierre away to France at a time when he might be put in a concentration camp as a Jew. And then she quotes Dolly, quote, he was the valuable one to save, said Dolly, the one who could not be replaced. As he is helpless in life, so I stayed to dispose of our belongings and raise a little money for our trip. I'm giving French lessons if you know anyone who's interested. So this woman stays behind under the glare. She was Jewish on both sides. She didn't have even the defense of having a Catholic father. And anyway, she comes after 2 years. So Shahu felt the violence close hand. The Bernheim's son, Leon, a gifted lawyer, socialist lawyer, Léonce Bernheim, was assassinated at Auschwitz together with his wife. Bernard Bernheim d'Alsace, the son of the owners of the glass house. His father, Jean-André Bloch, died also at Auschwitz or on the way to Auschwitz. They never found any information. The Chareaus' neighbor, Max Jacob, who lived next door to them, was caught at a camp and died before he could be transported to Auschwitz. Roger Gampel, another client, was interned at Nancy and lived to write a very moving book about his experiences in the camp. So his clients struggled through several destinies. And I also asked about what happened to the furniture. What's the issue of provenance here when we bring furniture in the museum? What happens? And so I looked at the first enormous document of the répertoire des biens spoliés en France durant la guerre, inventory of goods impounded by the Nazis in France during the war. And what happened was that immediately on arriving in France, they set up something called the Meuble Action, meaning the furniture division. And they confiscated all the furniture of the Jews. They put the Jews in the Veldiv, they rounded them up. The furniture, if it was simple and inexpensive furniture, they sent it to Germany to give to the Germans whose homes were being bombarded by the Allies. If they were elegant, they were going to turn a profit. And so they took over a Jewish department store called Le Grand Magasin Lévitan and transformed it into a department store of stolen goods, they confiscated the shop. And here you see the furniture. But I see mainly 18th century furniture, but actually, if you look at these volumes of the inventory of the goods, you will find Shahu second from the top. Actually, the top one, you see Jacques Adnet, who was also Jewish. You see Henri Kahn, who was also Jewish. You see Coleman, so several. But you see Pierre Chareau, the second one, and it describes mobilier de salle à manger, the dining room furniture, and it describes the table, the 4 chairs, the sofa, which is off. I had to cut it to fit the slide here. The occasional table you see there, everything belonging to Robert d'Alsace, a doctor not related to the other d'Alsace clients. So the furniture, his furniture was also caught there. Now earlier, I said to you, and this is the last point I want to make, that in fact, the goods, these beautiful pieces of furniture spoke on behalf of their owners, right? I said they spoke of the wealth, of the taste of their owners. And these pieces of furniture that we have downstairs are still speaking on behalf of their clients, but today they're telling a different story. They have become the eloquent witnesses of the violence that was visited upon these families. And this violence is not yet over until we, who are also witnesses after the fact, until we have done our part, our share, in piecing together their histories, the histories of these families, and restoring them to public memory. This exhibition at the Jewish Museum is the first installment of this project. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
We have a microphone, so I'll come to you so everyone can hear your question.
That was fascinating. I actually have a couple questions that go through, but let me begin with the beginning. The lamp, not one of these years, is it not also a reference to Diderot and the novel Not in These Years? It seems to me, given this environment of secular Jews, Protestants, maybe some Latin Catholics, but mainly secular Jews and Protestants, that would be a conscious reference in the novel, which was anti-religious, an attack on things like convents and such. And immediately when I looked at the show, I began laughing.
That's wonderful. It's a wonderful suggestion. That's very much in keeping with the spirit of many of these
well, I would think so.
Intellectuals. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, they come out of an environment where they are Jewish intellectuals in an environment which becomes increasingly skeptical of them.
You're all the more correct since the xenophobia and the Dreyfus, which marked them all, came from.
Yeah, and by the 20s and 30s, Jews are being kept out of professions And I was even wondering if, for instance, the fact that he didn't get into Beaux-Arts might have been because they weren't sure what he was. Could his background, in fact, have been a little bit more visible than he owned up? French Jews for a long time didn't own up. It wasn't something you discussed publicly. But
yeah, that I'm not sure about, because there were several Jewish architects who were Jewish on both sides, like Shah, a friend of his, who did get in. So would probably have, he could not afford the private training that would allow him to have the portfolios, because there were some Jewish, well-known Jewish architects as well. But I love La Religieuse, the Diderot connection. I just love that. I'm going to check.
Here's another thought. Okay, I'm a French historian, so you make the juices run. So the other thought is that France was very slow to industrialize, and even though it's on the list of industrialized countries in the early 20th century, it and Italy are like in the West, the last of the last, and they're not really considered, well, really industrialized. And the tradition in France has always been artisan. It's, you know, it's the small shop.
L'Article de Paris,
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so what I'm wondering is the fact that they were still doing this and sort of promoted all of this, and then you get the Exposition Universelle, the colonial exposition,
1931,
and Art Decorative in the 20s and the 30s. Isn't that really part of the French tradition? And I'm wondering if that's not a way to declare my Frenchness.
It was. The only problem, you're absolutely right, this was. And Shahu fought tooth and nail, but in the 30s, he tried to do work for mass production. That was the only thing that would save them, was if industry. So he tried to do, and he published some mobilier scolaire, for, furniture for the children in school, and he tried to mass produce them. And neither Chareau nor his peers could get anyone but the Faubourg, Saint-Antoine, since the 18th century, had been making furniture to continue it. And also, in the late 30s, the rise of anti-Semitism, especially after Léon Blum, was very, very strong. And so the defense of luxury appears on the extreme right. And Chareau breaks with the Société des Arts Décoratifs. He breaks a whole group of the more progressive. They secede and create their own association of modern artists. And they try to go towards more, and they didn't fail. The industrialists failed them. Thank you. Thank you. I love that. The Diderot. Just.
Was it your idea to do the wonderful digital expression downstairs in the glass house?
No, that was Rick Scofidio from Diller. Oh, thank you for saying. I'm so sorry. You just reminded me. Thank you so much. I wanted to end with that was Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro, and they hit upon that idea, Rick Scofidio, early on, and that was their idea. And I'll tell you another thing. They had this group of young millennials, and other than Dan Palmer, who the rest of us had no idea what they were doing. I mean, we knew what they were doing, but we didn't know how to do it. They would be there with computers, and these magic things would appear in front of our eyes, and we felt like fossils, relics, and it was a millennial thing. We worked with two teams here, these young people who did the digital technologies, the films and everything. The films could show people working at Chareau furniture, but in fact, they never came near the furniture. This was all done in studio. And we have no idea how they did all that. It's kind of magical.
Well, we want to thank whoever it is to thank. You're sending our young designers and architecture students here to see this. We're trying to figure out how to recreate it in modern and their own designs.
Thank you.
Sorry, I want to make a comment rather than a question. When I was visiting the Maison de Verre, I was talking to some of my French-Jewish, some of my Jewish friends from Paris, some who were quite a bit older than myself, and they said, oh my goodness, I completely forgot about that house. That's where I and my mother, he was the Jewish OBGYN for the old patrician Paris Jewish families. And the other thing, when I visited the house, they showed us how one of the walls, when somebody came in the doctor's door, one of the panels would close so that Mrs. Alsace could go about her home activities without being seen by the patient.
Yes. The house, in fact, doesn't have retaining walls. It has movable screens and partitions, which you can see down the exhibition. And some of them are made of perforated screens, so it has extraordinary transparency when you need it, and it closes up and protects the privacy of the women who went to see d'Alsace. Absolutely right. Thank you.
A question. How many pieces did he do with Eugène Prince?
I'm sorry?
How much work did he do with Eugène Prince?
He did a part for several years. He did work with the great furniture designer Eugène Prince, who then comes into his own. Now, the work, I don't know how many he did, but the work he did for Eugène Prince is all signed. None of the pieces downstairs are signed, so they were not done. You can see the signature, the PC of Shahu, and those apparently were only the things designed by Prince, who was himself a remarkable and very original designer, and who came into his own after that. So he began, again, he actually designed his own furniture. I mean, he could, but then he came into the profession a different route from Shahu. And in a sense went very far because he began by doing and then made it to this other group.
Thank you. Not a question, again, another comment. That when people go through the exhibit, if you'll notice, there's almost in every single room no ceiling lighting. All of the lighting is integrated with the architecture. It's very rare that he has any fixtures other than the torchères and the wall sconces, but nothing like this where you have light coming down on people, which is not that attractive. So he totally integrated the lighting with the architecture in order to feature the architecture and create a great ambiance.
And we could not use any of his lights because we're not allowed to, because of the danger. So when you borrow from museums or private collectors, there is this agreement you cannot bring the light in, which means that they're sort of deadly. They don't have that elegance, the beauty of that soft glow. Yes, that's true.
Anyone else? Thank you so much, Esther. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.